So we can go ahead and get started. Ryan, we need to, because Mark and Steve aren't here, we need to choose a chair for this meeting, correct?
Yeah, just temporary. Somebody has to technically run the meeting from membership on the board. So staff, until you nominate and elect a chair, we can only help you elect a chair. So I accept any nominations.
I nominate Brian.
Okay.
Second.
Second. Okay. And then everyone's in person, so we can do this.
Slide this over to you.
I'll just, all in favor say aye.
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 And I'll post.
Aye.
Sounds like you won your chairmanship, 4-1. We forgot to recall roll, so I'll do that really quick. Drummy. I'm calling roll, sorry. I'm going out of order.
Attendance or?
Yes.
Okay, here.
Kovic.
Here.
Ooh,
I can read myself.
Yes, please, sorry.
Skorochko, yes.
Okay, I'll learn that for next time. Davis.
Don't worry.
Yes,
And
here.
Binder.
Here.
Okay, sorry about that. I went out of order. And now hand it off to you.
Well, I will thank you for allowing me to chair. I'll be honest, I'm not exactly sure what we're doing today. So I will look to staff to help guide me through that process, but Hank?
Sure, thanks. So I will give a quick background on why we're here, what are we doing, and then I'll throw it off to our project manager, Drew Parker, to go into the more nitty-gritty of what this project is, what the study is. So essentially, we are here to talk about the Rogers Street, Madison Street, and Kinzer Pike corridors, from on the south side, Country Club Drive, to the north side at the bypass. Why are we here? So the background is in 2024, the city adopted a goal of Vision Zero 2039. That is essentially eliminating all fatal and serious roadway crashes on city roads by the year 2039. From there, months later in that year, the city also adopted the Safe Streets for All action plan. That describes the various action items and needs from the city to reach that goal of Vision Zero. That includes program, infrastructure investments, employees in the departments, etc. In that plan, we prioritized various intersections and corridors based on fatal and severe injury crash history, demographic information of folks in the area, and then public comment. That turned into the high priority network for the city, the streets and corridors that the city needs to work on as we reach that goal of Vision Zero. On that list are a handful of very long corridors: College and Walnut, Rogers Street, College Mall Road, West 3rd Street, 3rd and Atwater, etc. These are the main arterials through town that unsurprisingly land on this list. Because this Rogers Street corridor is so long and so much of it is on that high priority network, we decided to take a more comprehensive look at this corridor itself and look not just at the transportation, the streetscape aspect of it, but the land use around it, get more community focus on how we can improve our community's experiences along and across this corridor. So we partnered with Tool Design Group to help us do that. And so over the past few months, they have been working on this corridor analysis, looking at the crash history, the gaps analysis, the pedestrian quality, and looking at the existing conditions so we can then move forward and look at what could be on this corridor. Now, your all's role in this study. You all are the steering committee for the study. We started this is the first meeting we've had for the study. We will have a handful of more meetings throughout the spring and summer as we eventually form a short-term and long-term concept of what this corridor could look like, both on the street and around it. What we need from you all is, one, use your position in the community to talk to your friends, talk to your coworkers, your colleagues, your people who you know, to be that bridge between the community and staff. But also, you all are on this commission for a reason. You have different expertises in the field of transportation, and so what we need from you is to ask those deep questions. Push us when we need to be pushed, because this should not be a staff project. This should be a city project, a community project, and this is where we need you. There are a few events coming up that I've requested your attendance. There will be more as well, but again, this is what we want from you, is to push us, help us make this a community-centric project. Before I turn this over to Drew for the more long-form presentation on what we're doing, do you all have any questions?
I have one small question.
Yeah.
Did you start the recording?
Yes, I
I
started.
think you posted before. And
Yes.
yeah. The second question is, you have events scheduled, so that will be more on the public who lives in that area, or like when are we planning to talk to the people who live in there?
Oh yeah, great question. So I'm not sure if we're going to get into this much tonight, but so I'm glad you asked this. The week of March 23rd, that Monday through Friday in the last full week of March, is what we're calling workshop week. That is when we are doing a full press public outreach event for the entire week. We will have various small pop-up events on the corridor to just get street users' opinions and thoughts as they're going to work, as they're going to their friends' houses, etc. Those are unscheduled events to very much get the true street user of the corridor. Who's walking, who's rolling, who's driving along it, let's talk to them. There will be a formal public meeting that Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. at Switchyard Park. There will be a lot of promotion about this coming up next week. There will be press releases, social media posts, flyers, mailers, the whole sort. So public meeting, we will be hosting a few strolls and discusses along the corridor that you all have been emailed about. Those are essentially strolls along the corridor to focus on not necessarily what could be, but more of what is. What are you feeling in the moment? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What makes you feel comfortable? What makes you feel uncomfortable? Let's talk about that. Let's essentially balance that crash data, that hard data that we have and that tool design came up with, balance that with the qualitative feedback that we get from the community. Because there's so much feedback that we can't put into data. We can't put in the near misses. We can't put in those situations that we hear and we've experienced where, ooh, that felt a little jumpy here. We can't do that. So that's why we need you all to help us with that.
Clear. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
2 questions?
Yeah.
Can you go more slowly this time, go through what are the parameters, what's the definition of the corridor that we're looking at?
Yes, so this is the Rogers Street, Madison Street, and Kinzer Pike corridors on the south side, starting at city limits at Country Club Drive,
Okay.
and then going all the way north up to the State Road 45-46 bypass.
Oh, wow, okay. And when you name those 3 streets, those are all north-south streets?
Yeah.
Is it, do we focus on offshoots of that, or is it just mainly the main thoroughfare roads?
So that is a great question. We are mainly focusing on this particular thoroughfare here because it is one of the main north-south connecting streets through the city. That said, we are focusing on intersections along that corridor, and so that's where you might find that question of offshoots. We could talk about one that I'm very interested in is 3rd Street, that 3rd and Rogers intersection. So we are actually analyzing specifically that section of 3rd Street between Rogers and College because a lot of that goes together. And then I can name other intersections too along with that, but for the most part, the thoroughfare plus a little bit of 3rd Street.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so what exactly are we looking at? We're looking at pedestrian, we're looking at signals or side paths or bicycle paths or what?
We're looking at everything, quite frankly. That is one reason why we wanted to have this broad corridor study, because there is not just one answer. It's not just about signal retiming or protected left turns or bicycle lanes or crosswalks. It's about all of it and maybe more. And so we are starting off with the approach that it is a blank slate. We are looking maybe 10 years into the future, 15 years into the future of what could be, what could we do here within the given parameters, and then going from there. We don't want to propose anything proactively and then ask the public to give feedback. We want to get the feedback, look at the data, and then propose something from there. So there are two prongs we're looking at. One is long-term vision that I just talked about, and then one is short-term improvements. That's something that we haven't done as much of. I talked to you all last meeting about temporary and quick build improvements. We would like to do a lot of that along this corridor. Things that we can do more cost effectively in a shorter time frame that we might not be able to do in concrete.
And the long term is 2030, right? Or like,
So
how long is long term?
yeah, for this particular corridor study, we're looking at about 10 years.
That would be when we would come up with a plan and it would be implemented and completed within 10 years. I mean, in a perfect world.
In a perfect world, yes.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Not come up with whatever's starting tonight in 10 years.
Yeah.
I hope not.
Mhm.
That would be a lot of study.
I agree.
Hank, what about the section of Kinzer Pike north of 4546, but that is still within city limits?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that was honestly a discussion we had before beginning this corridor study. Essentially, we looked at that section as a different context zone. Just the characteristics of that street are different than what you get south of the bypass. And I would also say that the answer or the potential improvements for that section are a little bit more straightforward than you get further south. So that honestly is something we've talked about as a separate project, and we almost definitely will study that. I will also say that is not as high on the Safe Streets Priority Network, and so that was just another reason why we focused within this current scope.
Okay.
And to that point you just made about how these get ranked,
Yeah.
is that effectively just how many injuries there have been?
So some of it is, yes, we look at the past 5 years of fatal and severe injury crashes, and then we look at, what was it? About a year and a half ago, we went around the city and did a similar public outreach campaign called Safety Week, where we essentially talked to street users and residents all over the city. We had this grand old map of where do you feel safe, where do you not feel safe. That got incorporated too. And then we look at the demographic information of folks in the area. What's the percentage of folks who own a motor vehicle? What's the percentage of folks experiencing disabilities? What's the percentage of folks over 65 or under 18? Those more vulnerable street users, those are the folks that we want to focus on especially.
I think my question could be like more maybe basic knowledge, but I'm relatively new, so I'm just curious, like
Yeah.
that scale, like that whole part, is it like the size we usually work with, like, or like it's much longer than you would chunk it into? It feels like it's a long part of
Yeah.
the city, like huge part of the city. That's why, like, why would you approach like that on that scale?
Yeah, so good question. I will say this is the second full corridor study of this scope that we've done. Most of what we do is more short-term infrastructure projects, and for those projects, we do work on a smaller scale, more so because of funding. For this, because we're looking at such a long-term vision, it all goes together, and so there wasn't, outside of what Aobon mentioned of north of the bypass, there wasn't a clear cutoff of where the problem starts and where the problem ends, or where we should look at and shouldn't look at. And so we didn't want to say negate the north side of the corridor or negate the south side of the corridor or the downtown part of the corridor. It's all one corridor with similar usages. Now we'll talk about different characteristic zones of the corridor. We'll get into that. But for this, we wanted to look at more comprehensively, quite honestly.
Strategic planning makes sense on that scale.
Yeah.
Clear.
Any other questions before I pass it over to Drew? All right, I will pass it over to Drew Parker. He is the project manager from Tool Design, and he will tell us a little bit more about the visions and goals and project overview of the study.
Thanks, Hank. I appreciate it. Can you all hear me okay? in the
Yeah.
room?
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to share a presentation here. I'll just confirm you can see that as well. That showing up in the room now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, Hank, thanks for the introduction and thanks for the great introduction to me. My name is Drew Parker. I'm a senior planner at Tool Design based in Ann Arbor. And thanks for the great introduction to the project. I feel like you covered a lot of some of the first slides that I had here, and it was great for me to hear that context as well. Excited to be here with you all for the Transportation Commission. I think I have maybe 20 to 30 minutes of slides here. It's about 30 some odd slides. And we've kind of broken this down to 3 different sections. So I'll provide a project overview and schedule. And then we'll talk a little bit about the vision for the project, goals, and then also design objectives. So I think we can cover those 2 sections because they're a little bit smaller, then we can pause for questions at that time. And then I have an analysis summary that's maybe 20 slides. And so I think we can go through that as sort of the second chunk of the meeting and then break again for questions at the end of that, if that sounds good for everybody. So probably 5-10 minutes presentation, break again for questions, then maybe 20 minutes presentation on analysis, then break again for questions. So starting with the project overview, Hank covered this verbally, but yeah, the project extent that we're looking at is the Kinzer Pike, Rogers Street, and Madison Street corridor from the bypass all the way down to Country Club Drive. So you can see just a corridor extents map here on the right. And really the way that it's been communicated to us, the purpose of the project is to evaluate existing conditions and then make recommendations for design changes to improve safety along this corridor. So this is, to us, really a safety project. It may achieve other goals, but first and foremost, this is a safety project that's housed under the Safe Streets for All plan. And I think Hank mentioned this as well, we really want to focus on what's the long-term vision for design recommendations, that like 10-year window, but then also thinking of, in the short term, are there rapid implementation projects that we can do with quick build materials to achieve some of those same goals that the long-term design is intended to achieve. And like Hank said, so you all have adopted Vision Zero for 2039, so that means we're trying to eliminate serious injury and fatal crashes by then. So this is one corridor within the overall citywide street network where we're starting for this study. And then Hank mentioned this as well. So, on the left side here, you can see this is the citywide high injury network. So that's where those serious injury and fatal injury crashes occur most frequently across the city. So especially along the northern end of this corridor, there's a higher frequency of those types of crashes. And then when you look at the priority and kind of some of the other factors that Hank mentioned, this corridor, especially the northern end, really rose to the top as the highest priority, or highest tier of priority. So yeah, to give you a sense of the project overview, we started work in October, and that started with kind of data collection and doing this corridor analysis, which we've just recently completed in a draft form. Also coming up with the vision and goals. So then our next steps as the project advances is to develop some alternatives for design and then move ultimately into a concept design and then compiling that into a final corridor study. So yeah, like Hank said, this is our first Transportation Commission meeting. We will have a meeting during workshop week, that week of March 23rd to the 27th, and then we expect to have a few more Transportation Commission meetings later in the spring and summer. And our public engagement is going to be, like Hank said, really focused on that workshop week to just really get as much engagement as you can all at once. But we'll also have an online survey that will be open for a month. So if people aren't able to attend those events during that week, they'll be able to engage with the project via the project website as well. So I feel like I'm repeating some of the things that Hank said, but sometimes it's good to hear things multiple times, at least for me. So the corridor analysis, like Hank said, it includes crash analysis and traffic data, a gaps analysis, parking utilization data, as well as future land use review. So we'll go through that in the second half of this presentation. Alternatives development, so our goal is to come up with 2 alternative design ideas, and that could vary depending on different context zones. Like people have mentioned in the meeting so far, that it's a really large corridor that's citywide, and so it differs depending on which section you're in. But as we develop those alternatives, what we'll do is develop some sort of cross-section. So you can see this example on the right. This is just from a different tool design project, but we'll come up with something like that and have multiple alternatives and plan view concepts to show. And we'll then evaluate, which alternative we think meets the project goals and design objectives the best. So then from there, when we pick a alternative that we want to move forward with, we'll develop plan view concepts at up to 10 intersections. As you can see, an example on the right here, this is just a typical from another project of what our concept designs generally look like in plan view. So looking at how we can reconfigure intersections and what kind of safety improvement elements we can add there. And then our public engagement approach, as mentioned, it's really focused on the workshop week. You can see these couple of photos from Safety Week for the Safe Streets for All plan, where we had stroll and discuss activities and pop-up activities where we're just trying to meet people where they're at, do a quick 30-second activity and give them a snack and send them on their way. It's a nice way to get quick feedback if people don't have time to come to a public meeting for an hour. All right, so that kind of covers the overall project overview at a very high level of what we will be doing from now through the summer. The next section I want to move into is the project vision statement, goals, and design objectives. So these are in draft form. These are statements that we've come up with working with city staff. So we're really looking for you all as commissioners to provide feedback on if you think this is headed in the right direction, if you agree with the vision statement, goals, and design objectives. So the vision statement that we've come up with is to say the Rogers Street, Madison Street, and Kinser Pike corridor will become a safe, accessible, and connected multimodal street that supports existing neighborhoods, advances Bloomington's values, and guides future growth towards walkable, people-centered places. So you can see it's really focused on safety first, but there's all these other goals that we're trying to achieve with the corridor study, which is really taking a broad look at the corridor. So I think I'll run through the goals and design objectives as well, and then we can pause, and I'm happy to kind of move back and forth between these slides to talk about each of these with you all. So as far as goals, we have 6 goals that are intended to support this vision. So the first one is we have a goal to eliminate fatal and serious injury crashes. So we'll do that through really street design changes that we know can help reduce the chances of fatal and serious injury crashes. We also want to support multimodal travel for all ages and abilities. We know this is an important north-south corridor that connects all throughout the city, and so we need to ensure that our concepts support travel for all modes and for all ages and abilities. We also want to align the street design with existing and planned development and make sure that any changes are supporting existing development as well as known future planned development. We also want to deliver cost-effective and implementable improvements. So we want our concepts to be feasible, and we also want to look for opportunities to have short-term options that can be installed soon to make those types of safety improvements sooner than the long-term improvements when they may be feasible. We also want to build community consensus through inclusive engagement. So we want to make sure that we're reaching a broad cross-section of folks that use Rogers Street, depending on how they may use it and how they interact with it, whether they live, work, visit this corridor. And then lastly, we want to support economic vitality and community development. So in addition to those project goals, we also have 8 design objectives. And design objectives are really intended to support the goals, and the goals support the vision. But the design objectives are, in my mind, the way that you evaluate the different designs to say, is this achieving the things that we're trying to do with this project? So the first one of these is to reflect community values and corridor identity. The second one is to advance safety through proven street design. The third is to create a context-sensitive street that calms traffic. The fourth is to build a continuous multimodal corridor for all users. And then the fifth is ensure universal accessibility and comfort. The sixth design objective is to support redevelopment and local economic vitality. The seventh is to strengthen connections to key destinations and the citywide network. And then the last design objective is to support safe routes to school. So each of these design objectives can be evaluated, and we can say whether or not alternatives that we're proposing are achieving one or all of these 8 different objectives. The next thing I wanted to mention is that staff have also kind of already, oops, did not mean to advance, sorry. Staff have already taken a cut at splitting the corridor up into different context zones. As people have mentioned, it's very different along the corridor depending on where you're looking at. And so city staff have already, at a draft level, said these are what we think are the 4 different context zones within this corridor. So the first section is the area north of 17th Street to the bypass. And then the second area is from 11th Street to 17th Street. The third area is from Wiley Street to 11th Street. And then the fourth area is south of Wiley Street down to Country Club Drive. So I know there's a lot of information to throw at you all, but I want to pause there and see if folks have initial thoughts on any of those things that we just presented, and we can start wherever folks want to.
May I jump in?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Drew, for this presentation. Would you mind going back to your previous slide where you show the 4 segments? I think commissioners would maybe just like a moment to take a look at these 4 context zones for just a second.
Absolutely.
As a follow-up, I think I would ask maybe if you can give more context on how they were originated, like what is the reason behind them being like that?
Mm-hmm. So there's no perfect answer here, and also this is very much a back and forth. These are the context zones and this is what we're going with. If you have other feedback, please give it to us. Essentially, how we defined it, so I'll start south and go north from there. From Country Club up to Wiley, it is almost primarily residential. There's some businesses over there, but it's residential, and that's where you see less of that downtown, more urban context, and it feels a little bit more suburban. You have long stretches without crossings in there or major intersections. You have a couple with Patterson or what is it? Rockport, thank you. But it's not too many. But then once you get into that third section, the Wiley to 11th Street, that is your downtown area. Wiley is where is the beginning of the Hopewell development, where you have the new police station, where you have these businesses coming up, and you have just a much denser urban context going through downtown. And then 11th Street to me is that barrier of, okay, you are leaving downtown and you're entering more of a residential space again. 11th to 17th, this is a smaller context zone, but to me that is an area that is delineated on both sides by 17th and 11th, where it feels different south of 11th and it feels different north of 17th. And then 17th to the bypass is, again, you could arguably combine those top 2, 1 and 2 into one, but to me they just feel a little bit different than each other. There is no perfect science to this, I do want to say, but looking at the aerial view, looking at the land use, and looking at the street as a whole, that's how we initially defined it.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Does the numbering system relate to anything, or is 1 the top priority, or?
No, it's just north and south, that's all.
Okay.
I think it would be also interesting to see, you had a slide about the injury ranking or something, and like it would be interesting to see it once again after we saw this zoning.
Yeah.
We've seen.
Are you talking about this one?
Yeah. So would you say that the bottom part is like it's different shade, right? So it's less, right?
Yes.
Medium, low.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there is a legend. Oh yeah.
No, is it?
It's from 2nd to Country Club, that southern half of the corridor, that is high, and then from 2nd north to the bypass is highest.
So those two, first and second, they have no difference in injuries, basically the same, even though, yeah, interesting.
But as you can
And
see,
when I get to-
oh, sorry, Drew, go ahead.
I would say when I get to the analysis summary too, we have much more detailed crash data to show as well, if you're interested in that. Like the actual locations of crashes by mode and severity. So I'll show a few more maps, but this is just comparison to citywide.
Okay, and also I think I have more general question. In
Yeah.
general, when did we do anything to that corridor or like to those parts last time?
Great question. I don't have that information on me right now, but that is a part of what we in Tool talked about over the past couple months of where are projects that we have done recently? What might skew the data in one way or another, or has anything improved after we've completed something? And the answer is we've done some things. I will say Rogers and 17th is an intersection that we improved in the past few years. We installed a pedestrian island at Allen and Rogers. So there have been a handful, but nothing really to change the entire scope of the
Isolated.
corridor. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, like recent years, we've done some work. It's not like decades
Yeah.
in the past. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
This might be a too high an elevation question, but has the city council weighed in on this and said, we want you to look at this? Or is this something where we could come up with a plan and they could say, yeah, it's a great plan, guys, but we're not doing that?
This is something that right now we are not planning on going to council with. This is not going to be an adoption into the transportation plan, whatever this final study is. This would be reviewed by the Transportation Commission. That is the body that we would like review and approval from once we get to that point. But from our end, the initial council approval of the impetus for the study was the approval of the Safe Streets for All action plan, which listed this as one of the highest priority streets in the city.
And then eventually presumably come from the Transportation Commission as a recommendation
Yes.
to further the
Exactly.
Safe Streets for All plan.
Yeah.
Great.
So when it says weighted scores or corridors,
Mm-hmm.
how are the scores weighted?
Yeah, great question. I won't get into the full scoring methodology of it. That is available on the full Safe Streets for All action plan. It's there and it's honestly quite interesting to look at. But in a short sentence or two, it goes back to fatal and severe injury crashes over the past 5 years of when we included this data, demographic information of nearby residents, and then public comment. Those are the three main categories of data that we used, and then weighted is essentially standardizing those different data sets to make them weighted. I forget what we weighted them, call it 33, 33, 33. That's not what we weighted it, but it's an example, and then that is the standardized data set.
What about traffic volume? Is that in part of the,
So
traffic and pedestrian, because the north part of Kins or whatever, you get those apartments up there, you're gonna have a lot more people walking through there.
yeah, for sure. And so that is one reason why we're studying this in the first place, of looking at oncoming or future developments that we'll get into actually in a few minutes here. But the methodology, I would have to go back and look to give you a for sure answer, but it does talk about the profile of streets and the risk profile, that being number of lanes, traffic volumes, etc. But also then you're getting into compounding variables of, well, the risk profile aligns with the fatal and severe injury, the crash data, and so maybe we're double weighting this part of it.
Should we jump back to the vision statement? Do folks have thoughts on the vision statement?
My reaction is just that this seems fine. I mean, it seems to align with the Safe Streets for All action plan as well as the transportation plan. I mean, I assume that that's most of the inspiration and where you kind of borrow the language for the vision statement from. So,
Yes.
yeah.
I think my reaction that it's aligned with everything pretty well, but it covers so many different things. So it's phrased pretty nicely, but then like you will have a priority when you'll be deciding on things. So I
Mhm.
think if it's important to highlight it in this stage, maybe it's something we should do. But otherwise, we can keep it that general, like trying to fulfill all the goals we have. But I don't think it's always possible. That's why we'll end up prioritizing something over another.
Is that something you'd like to get into when we talk about the goals of this project? Because the goals go into this vision even more. Would you like to prioritize or create some kind of prioritization list of these 6 goals?
I think in a way it's a question also based on the past experiences and the way other projects work.
Mhm.
Maybe my assumption is wrong. Maybe like we can achieve all the goals when we work on any project or research. But if that's not true, then I think we may want to explore the priority of it and decide what's more important.
No, that's a great question. I don't have a good answer right now, I'll be honest, but I'd like to look into this more. Maybe that's something we can talk about from now between this and our next steering committee meeting, and maybe we could come to you with something more then. Okay.
But it also maybe we'll have more data, like more information, and like once we're like more into the process, we'll see like where it will be like leaning towards, and that's it. It will
No, I
go
like
more
that.
neutrally,
I'm really glad you brought that up. I think our goal is to align design objectives with evaluation criteria to look at the 2 different alternatives or different alternative designs. And I think we would definitely want your input on both goals and design objectives of which of these are higher priority or should be weighted higher when we're evaluating those things. Because right now we're just sort of saying these are the 8 design objectives, the 6 goals, and it's kind of all being equal, knowing that overall the vision is eliminating serious injury and fatal crashes. But I think we'll definitely want that kind of weighting input. So yeah, we can bring that back for the next meeting.
So when you give us your design options, you'll give us the why you chose that design?
Yeah,
It's more or
of
less-
course.
Are there any design objectives missing that folks feel like we need covered?
I think we have plenty for now. I think we'll decide on whether it's achievable.
Okay.
And also, if you, after this meeting, if you all think of anything, I'll be sending this out to you all. If you think of anything you want to combine, add, prioritize, please let me know. This is not just a one-time question by any means.
Okay, any other sections on kind of this front matter, the first section, or are we ready to move into more analysis content?
Let's go for analysis.
I will make one comment. Driving down Roger Street is one of my least favorite. It is very stressful.
Why?
It just every section of it has its own like today I went to the cleaners before I came here, and so that it's just I feel like there's lots of things coming at you from lots of intersections, lots of pedestrians. It feels narrow, but not in a designed way, but just in a it's just not. It could definitely use some improvement.
Okay, that's fair.
Any other?
Is there are all things on the table in terms of like acquiring property to make the road wider and things like that, or is it limited in we are not we need to work within the right of way we currently have?
I would say right now all things are open. Obviously, once we get into that phase of conceptual design and even maybe a full design, things will get narrowed down. But right now, I don't want to say no to anything.
Okay, if we're ready, then I'll move into the analysis summary. This is about 20 slides, so I think maybe it'll take about 15 minutes to get through these, and then we can pause for questions at the end and then jump back to any slides that we want to jump back to. So there's quite a bit of information here, but we'll start with safety, since that's our number one priority, this being a Safe Streets for All type project. So to start with safety analysis, what we did is looked in more detail at 10 years of crash data. And in that 10-year period, there were 80 crashes that resulted in serious injuries. There were no crashes resulting in fatalities along the project corridor extents. So that's a good thing, but there were 80 crashes that resulted in serious injuries. And what you can see from some of these charts here is that where there are crashes involving pedestrians, they much more frequently result in serious injury type crashes, whereas crashes with bicyclists a little less so as a percentage, and same with motor vehicle only crashes. And then you can see from that map on the right, the highest serious injury crash intersection is the bypass intersection. I think that probably comes as no surprise to anybody. But then the tie for second is 17th Street and Country Club on the south end. So we also looked at this just year by year to see, how are total crashes and serious injury crashes trending over that time period. And you can see that there's a big dip in 2020 for COVID. That's just the case across the board with all crash analysis. I think what's interesting is that the number of minor or no injury crashes almost dropped in half, but the serious injury crashes didn't drop quite as much as you would expect. Some of that is just that it's a very small sample size, but some of that could also be attributed to when there were lower traffic volumes during COVID. We know just from nationwide studies that there was more speeding and more risky driving behavior happening in 2020 during COVID. So, but generally looking at that yellow line, serious injury crashes are slightly trending downward in that 10-year study period, and then there was a slight uptick in 2024. The most common serious injury crash types are right angle crashes, so when someone drives into the side of another car. So typically, at an intersection, that could be from running a red light or other types of failure to yield type behaviors that result in those more severe type crashes. The second most common serious injury crash type was rear end crashes, and then the third most common was pedestrian involved crashes.
Oh, sorry, can I
So
just interrupt with a quick question? Could you briefly explain the items that are labeled non-collision as well as other, explain in narrative?
Yeah, I can't speak directly to that, knowing the in-dot crash data sometimes has some of these, categories where it's not clear exactly what happened. Non-collision, I am not exactly sure what that is. It could be, sometimes that's something like a medical emergency, or it can be just things that kind of don't fit into another category based on how things work in other crash data sets. Other explained narrative is just, it didn't fit into one of the standard crash types that are on the form. So then there would be more detail. And again, those tend to be ones that are more obscure types of crashes, like maybe a vehicle caught on fire or something. Sometimes that happens and can cause serious injuries. So those are my best guesses. I don't know exactly without looking in detail at those.
I think those are just
crashes.
the check boxes on the police report.
Yeah, could be. Okay, it's just a couple of them out of a whole list, so not a big deal, but just figured I'd ask. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So this map shows just the crashes involving pedestrians. So 11 of these resulted in a serious injury. It's a small sample size for 10 years, so there's not necessarily a clear pattern. But there were 2 at the bypass, so that was the one that had the most serious injury crashes. And just in general, you can kind of see where crashes, whether they be minor or no injury or serious injury, are clustered, and they're kind of more clustered north of First Street, which is why in the Safe Streets for All plan that area was a higher priority. And some of that also has to do with just more people walking around in that area.
I have sorry to interrupt, but a question about, so is there a reason that the data is limited to 10 years? And the reason I ask is I have a memory of at least 2 fatalities at 46 and Kinzer within the last, maybe it was in the last 15 years, but I thought they were relatively, I mean, that's a bad intersection. But if we know of it, does this only include what's listed in police reports, or if we have information of other injuries, do we include that data? So that's 2 compound questions for you to answer. I apologize.
They would, no need to apologize. This is just crash data from police reports. So if it's not there, then yeah, we didn't have access to that data. And as for why we would be looking at 10 years, we actually typically look at a 5-year window. We try to look at like the last 5 full years of data. We looked at 10 years just to have a bigger sample size, honestly, to try to draw more conclusions. So that's why we did that in this case.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions on this one? So crashes involving bicyclists, there were 18 in that 10-year period, 1 of which resulted in a serious injury, and that was on the south end of the corridor. So this is a pretty limited data set, a pretty small sample size to really draw a lot of conclusions from, I think. But our goal is to have no crashes where a pedestrian or bicyclist is hit. So crashes involving only motor vehicle drivers, 68 of these resulted in a serious injury. You can see similarly, the bypass had the most serious injury type crashes, and 5% of the crashes during the study period resulted in serious injuries. So looking in more in depth at safety, kind of getting to the systemic safety and priority analysis that Hank was talking about previously in Safe Streets for All. When we don't have tons of crash data or very clear conclusions on where we think there are safety problems based upon looking historically at crash data, we can also look at speed data, because we know speed is a factor in the potential for severe crashes to occur. So in this case for the corridor, we have 2 different traffic counts that had speed data recorded. And so the map we're showing here shows what the speed limits are in the corridor. So north of 17th Street and south of Patterson, currently the speed limit is 30 miles an hour. And then in that middle segment, the speed limit is 25 miles an hour. So there were 2 previous traffic counts done, and the city plans to collect additional traffic counts to supplement this. But of the 2 that we have, currently traffic volumes motor vehicle traffic volumes are between 9,000 and 11,000 vehicles per day. In the section between 8th and 9th Street, the 85th percentile speed was 33 miles per hour, and the 85th percentile speed is the speed at which 85% of the drivers are driving at or below that speed, and it is typically used as the speed to set the speed limit. The other count we have, the speeds are a little bit higher, so down between Hillside and Wilson Street, south of Patterson, the 85th percentile speed was 38 miles an hour. So from a safety perspective, these are pretty high speeds for areas where there's pedestrians and bicyclists crossing. And so those higher speeds create the potential for more severe crash outcomes should a crash occur. And looking more in depth at the motor vehicle traffic volume, so we like to look at kind of hourly capacity of streets to understand how existing traffic volume is compared to the capacity of the street. So what this chart shows you is at that location where the traffic volume is a little bit higher between Hillside Drive and Wilson Street, the capacity of a signalized 2-lane street is 720 vehicles per hour per direction. Because there's turn lanes, we really consider this to be a 3-lane signalized corridor, which is that green line, which is 864 vehicles per hour per direction. So breaking down that traffic count that we have, we just wanted to show that the traffic volumes are well below the carrying capacity of the street. And typically we say with a 2-lane street that has left turn lanes, usually the upper limit of motor vehicle traffic volumes is about 25,000 vehicles per day. So even with that higher volume being 11,000, we're significantly below the capacity of a two-lane street with left turn lanes at intersections. And one reason we like to bring this up sometimes is because when there's excess capacity or the volume is significantly below the carrying capacity, that means that in off-peak periods, people can actually speed because there's no other cars to get in their way. And we know that can be an issue in some communities. But the takeaway point here is that the carrying capacity, the traffic volume is significantly below the carrying capacity of the street. So we also mapped existing sidewalks and missing sidewalks along the corridor. And for the most part, there are sidewalks all along the corridor, but when you get north of 17th Street, there's a couple stretches that have missing sidewalks on one side of the street or the other. We also mapped all of the existing bicycle facilities. So south of Patterson, there's a multi-use path on the west side of the street. But north of there, there's not really any bike infrastructure. There's occasional bicycle lanes, which are sometimes only on one side of the street. And there's no bicycle, all ages and abilities bicycle connection that goes across the railroad tracks on the north end. We also mapped the existing pedestrian bicyclist crossings. So this map here, you can see we showed all the locations of crosswalks along the corridor as these dots, and they're color-coded by what type of crossing infrastructure there is at that crosswalk. So either rectangular rapid flashing beacons, I think there's one of those at 4th, and I think one other location on the corridor, or if there's a crosswalk with a crossing warning sign, just the orange pedestrian crossing sign, if there's a crosswalk at an always stop, or if there's a traffic signal. So looking at all those crossing opportunities, we also mapped the distance between those crossing opportunities, and then divided that distance by 2 to say, you know, if you were halfway between one of these crossing opportunities, what's the maximum distance you would have to walk to get to a pedestrian crosswalk? And so you can see there's a couple locations where there's pretty long stretches between pedestrian crossing opportunities. And we picked that threshold of 900 feet as the top threshold because that's about a 5-minute walk for a typical walk speed. We also mapped all the streetlights along the corridor. So there are 2 different types of streetlights along the corridor. There's standard streetlights, which are those red dots, and that's kind of more of a large overhead streetlight that's intended to illuminate the whole roadway. And then there's also yellow pedestrian-oriented lights, which exist in a couple different stretches along the corridor, one being between Switchyard Park and 1st Street, and the other being between Kirkwood and the Beeline Trail. And there's a couple intersections that don't have any lighting at all. So those 3 intersections listed, House Street, Smith Ave, and 3rd Street. And so as part of our proposed alternatives, we would propose adding additional lighting at those intersections. We also mapped the bus routes along the corridor. So most of the Bloomington transit routes that run along the corridor, they just run for a couple of blocks and, you know, across the corridor, so they're not exactly running north south along the corridor. The exception is Route 2, which does run along Rogers from 1st and 2nd Streets down to Graham Drive and Rockport Road, kind of makes a loop and then comes back up. We also looked at existing parking restrictions and on-street parking opportunities along the corridor. There's a very limited amount of on-street parking allowed along the corridor. Most stretches of the corridor don't allow on-street parking, but there's these handful of pockets of on-street parking where parking is allowed along the corridor. And then we also did a parking utilization survey just to see how much is this on-street parking being used along the corridor. And the answer we found is that it's very underutilized, almost not used at all. We looked at 3 different periods of morning, a midday, and an evening survey period. And the maximum number of cars that were ever parked along the corridor for the entire stretch was 7 cars in the evening period. And there was one block between University and 1st Street, and one period where there were 3 cars parked there. So overall, the takeaway is that though there's a little bit of parking permitted on this corridor, people aren't really using it hardly at all. We also mapped the existing land use, and I think Hank talked about this a little bit, as this is a way to think about those context zones. So there's a really wide range of land uses along the corridor. There's single dwelling housing, multi-dwelling housing, mixed use areas, institutional and civic areas, and park areas. And it's a real mix depending on where you are along the corridor, which makes sense because we're looking at a whole city cross section in this study. The future land use plan includes proposed urban corridor on the northern end, downtown and the downtown area, and then most of it is mixed urban residential, but then there's also pockets of institutional and civic, employment center, and parks and open spaces. And then the last land use thing that we mapped is just known ongoing and future development areas. So there's really 3 major ones, which are the Aspen Heights redevelopment, the Trades District, and the Hopewell redevelopment. So those are 3 major areas that are redeveloping currently and in the future. And so we just want to keep that in mind as part of the study and how the street design can support those developments. So all that being said, what we did is we pulled together 7 key findings that we think are important to take away from all this analysis. And so the first one is that the Rogers Corridor is a top priority for safety improvements. In the last 10 years, there were 80 serious injury crashes, and 11 of these serious injury crashes involved a person walking. So it makes sense that it was a high priority corridor in the Safe Streets for All plan. We also think that speed is likely a contributing factor to some of these safety concerns, with those 85th percentile travel speeds being 33 and 38 miles an hour, which are significantly higher than the posted speed. And we know at that upper end, 38 miles per hour becomes a pretty dangerous speed for crossing pedestrians. Another finding is that some areas of the corridor are really comfortable and walkable, but outside of those pockets of nice areas with street lighting and really multi-use path and nice sidewalks, there are quite a few sections that are less pleasant to walk along and have missing sidewalks or deteriorating sidewalks and not great pedestrian lighting. Our 4th key finding is that the southern portion of the corridor has a nice multi-use path on the west side, but moving north of there's gaps in the bicycle network, and there's no low-stress bicycle option to connect over or under the railroad tracks in this stretch. Our next key finding is that on-street parking is allowed only along several blocks of the corridor, and utilization of this very minimal on-street parking is very low, in most cases 0%. Our 6th key finding is that there are these key redevelopments happening, and improving the streetscape design can support the city's goal for these new developments to support safe streets and walkable access. And then lastly, one thing we think was a key finding is just that this corridor is an important north-south connection across the length of the entire city for all modes. So this is one of those streets that everybody has to use no matter how they travel to get through the entire city, north to south. So that's a summary of our analysis findings thus far. And yeah, I'll open up to questions, and I'm happy to jump back to any slides as needed.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, yes.
Thanks very much, Drew. A couple comments, questions, corrections. The slide about street lighting was interesting to me. I just want to note there are, in fact, intersection streetlights at Howe Street and Smith and 3rd Street. I know that because I spent a long time trying to get Duke Energy to reinstall the streetlight at Howe. It was improperly removed when Duke replaced a utility pole, and they did not install a new streetlight until I filed a report to get that reinstalled. There's one at Smith, but it is frequently burnt out, so it was probably just not illuminated when somebody was looking at that one. And then 3rd Street, there is now a streetlight there, but there used to not be one. And then another comment on the 3rd Street intersection. So that's going to be a major intersection because that's a high pedestrian volume, that's a high vehicle volume. There is a street light there, thankfully now. I think it's at the southeast corner, but you know, someone crossing the street on the north side or the east side of that intersection. I mean, they're crossing 5 lanes of traffic, and so it's, you know, it's a big intersection. There's just one street light there. I would suggest that, you know, when considering street lights along this corridor, that we get a little bit more detailed than just whether there is a street light there, because I think its exact placement is pertinent, as well as especially for larger intersections or wider cross sections of this corridor, whether or not more than one street light would be appropriate, you know, for larger intersections and that sort of thing. I was pleased to see that, you know, there's at least a distinct, you know, you're distinguishing between, I guess, what you're labeling as a standard street light versus a pedestrian-oriented light. But I would be curious as to know, like, what that actually means, what the definitions of those are. So I'll stop there, though, because that's a few different comments and questions.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the feedback on there being streetlights there. I think we were provided data from Duke Energy, so I'm guessing their data is just out of date.
Yeah, it's no surprise.
Yeah, and as far as the definition of like standard versus pedestrian-oriented, I think the pedestrian-oriented ones are, you know, the ones that are lower, kind of more like decorative streetlights. But they illuminate like the sidewalk much better than the overhead streetlights, and they're more frequent, as you can see on the map.
Yeah. I live in the neighborhood, and a common complaint, I would say, from neighbors and from the Prospect Hill Neighborhood Association is the lack of pedestrian scale street lighting along Rogers between Kirkwood and First Street, for sure. And I mean, you can see it right there. It's kind of ironic because that section is, you know, the closest to downtown, and yet it has the most poor lighting of most of the middle of the corridor.
Thanks for that comment.
Yeah.
Since we're looking at this slide, I think I'm just curious. So we can see that there are plenty of pedestrian-oriented lights in those 2 sections. What can we conclude from that? Can you like elaborate more? Like, is it good? Is it working? Or like, do we need that many? Or like, do we need more? Like, for me, like out of context, it's interesting.
Yeah, so the question of is it working? I think that would be more based on qualitative feedback that we would get in a few weeks of.
But like with data, if we like compare it with any other data you mentioned before.
Right, I'm interested, especially when we have either events in that area, either pop-ups or public meetings in that area, or strolls and discusses on those sections of the corridor, what people think about. And these strolls are going to be in the middle of the day, but I'm curious about local residents of how do you feel walking here versus south or north of this area without lighting. And you know, I don't think it's that hard to come to the conclusion of you feel a little bit more comfortable with pedestrian lighting than without pedestrian scaled lighting. But that is one piece of feedback that I am especially interested in terms of pedestrian comfort.
Can I say something else? Not pedestrian lighting related. Drew, would you mind jumping to the slide about land use?
The existing or future?
I guess either one. I'm not a parent, but I think if I were, I would probably want to point out that there are a number of schools along this corridor. And I recall that one of the, I can't remember if it was one of the design objectives or the project goals, but it had something to do with supporting safe routes to school. And so I think highlighting, you know, the locations of schools, so we're talking like Arlington Heights, Fairview, Tri-North, et cetera. You know, the fact that there's many schools along this corridor, I don't really see that highlighted in either the land use. Maybe it's on a different slide and I missed it,
But I think that's important to kind of consider where those schools are along this corridor, and that those should probably be fairly high priority sections if, in fact, we are wanting to support safe routes through school when looking at this corridor. Because I see a lot about housing and mixed use and parks and things, but
8th Street is quite tricky. Fairview School, yeah. The crossing there.
Same with 6th. And in fact, at this commission's last meeting, we heard from a member of the public
About 6.
who pointed out specifically 6th Street and how difficult it is to cross there. So,
I appreciate that feedback. I think what we can do is just add the schools to all the maps as a destination to make it clear,
Yeah.
you know, where
Yeah.
they are, and so it's not getting lost in the noise of other things. Appreciate that.
can you jump to the future land use slide? I think it's one over. Yeah. Just so we can look at this for a minute.
I think it's kind of interesting to have a bit different categories. You can map them back, but it's like, it looks a little bit different, not exactly like one-to-one correlation. That's why it takes a minute, you know, to compare and like see the differences. Not all of them, but like some of them, I think.
Yeah, so I think just kind of getting more detailed here, I think that Fairview Elementary is labeled on here as just institutional slash civic, which doesn't really tell you about how frequently people are accessing that, or when, like what times of day, and you know, the fact that it's children walking to school and so forth. So definitely would encourage a little bit more detail around looking at the locations of schools. And also I think that maybe in some cases there are nearby schools that are maybe, you know, it may be more than a block or two away from the corridor, but that are obviously still important.
Project schools, not on there.
Right.
You know, I'm looking at that map, where it says employment center down there just south of Patterson and Long Rogers. The city had a study or some guidelines or something like that years ago that it had to be developed with in a certain way, the streetscape. And that's where a lot of those pedestrian lights are, which are, I assume, are the acorn style of lights instead of the overhead lights with the mast arm. And so I think that was a requirement for that area. So that might be something to look at in there.
What is that area? Is it just vacant currently?
What's that?
Is that area vacant currently?
That's where Novo Nordisk Catalan is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Across from the warehouse?
Yeah.
the dermatology center, and then
Okay.
there's some kind of data place there that's just south of dermatology.
I was also curious, is there any way, you mentioned that there were some projects from the past years,
Yeah.
and also there was the chart about injuries, and like there was like the trend of going down
Mhm.
with time over years. Any correlation with those projects and the data? Would
Yeah.
be interesting to hear.
That's a good question. We don't have that yet. That is something that I'm interested in looking at. The projects that I'm thinking of, again, since I've been at the city, I wouldn't necessarily want to use before and after data because we don't have a full 5-year sample size of data yet, but I'm sure there are some projects along the corridor where we could look at it before and after.
I think it would be interesting what worked basically
Yeah.
and what didn't. We don't want to have more lights or something if it didn't work.
Another thing I was perhaps in this slide deck and I missed it, but in case it's not in here, I would also say that considering, we don't have any representative today here from Bloomington Transit, but if John or Shelley were here, they would say, what about Bloomington Transit? That's, I think, something important to consider here as well. Oh, okay, we do have it. Okay, I missed it. Thank you.
Yeah, we have the routes mapped, but I mean, you know,
But not the
yeah, if
stops.
there's anything else that we need to know, yeah, I would appreciate that direction as well.
The stops, didn't you?
Yeah, stops and you know, perhaps future transit service. I mean, BT has a number of different projects they're dreaming up for future bus service. So I think considering how a future design of this corridor would support the long-term Bloomington transit goals, I think would be also important to consider, useful to consider.
I don't know if this is the right place for this, but, the pedestrian versus vehicle, accidents that happen at crosswalks that are poorly illuminated. I'm sure they happen here just as much as they happen in some of these other high, injury or fatality corridors, but, Bloomington has a couple of hawk signals.
Yep.
But there are other technologies,
Sure.
Like the in-roadway warning lights, but other things that alert cars with lighting
Yep.
that the crosswalk is going to be used. And I just think that there are so many ways to do crosswalks better in terms of illumination. But from an accessibility point of view, the United States does not do much except truncated domes for warnings. And it's going to be a long time before the United States has a true tactile paving network, if it ever even does.
Yep.
But we should be thinking about the fact that there are plenty of blind people who do use fixed route transit, and making sure that there are at least we could do minimal tactile indicators that are more directional than just warning. So this is a bus stop, and of course making sure that the that the warning indicators on one side line up with the crosswalk on the other side, which is not always the case. So, I don't know how much renovation we're doing in the future of this, or remodeling of this corridor we're doing, but those are things that are not always required, but could really help with the safety of our citizens.
No, these are the comments that we want. This is great, quite honestly.
Okay.
I will also add, just on the BT front, I've been communicating with their transportation planner to get stop data, future service data, frequency data, some of the things that you've already talked about, because these are the things that people want to know. We want to make this a more transit-friendly city, and this is a key corridor to make it more transit-friendly.
One of the big elephants in the room here is that a lot of those vehicle crashes are at the 45-46 bypass, which of course is INDOT jurisdiction. I'm wondering if either of you, I guess, would care to comment about, if Tool or if the city has had any discussions with INDOT recently about that intersection, and how, hopefully INDOT realizes that that's a problem also. I don't know if INDOT themselves have any, concrete plans to do improvements of their own about that intersection. Because I also understand that, that being an INDOT intersection, I suspect the city has a lot of limitations that we have to work within or around. And there's probably a few things we just simply can't do anything about because of jurisdictional issues. So I don't know if you guys would maybe kind of comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
So this, for the city at least, we know that this intersection is a problem. This was, if not the highest, one of the highest priority intersections noted in the Safe Streets for All Action Plan.
Which one? Oh,
The
one.
Kinzer and the bypass.
23.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
yeah.
This is an intersection that we hear about all the time. We see things happen all the time, and we have the data to support that there needs to be improvements. That said, Aobon, as you mentioned, this is an INDOT intersection. We do not own or maintain this intersection, and we rely on the state to proactively do something. We have had talks with them, mainly our engineering department with their engineering department have talked with each other, and I know that there is a common understanding that improvements need to happen. In terms of timeline, I'm not too familiar about that. I have a note to follow up with you all about that because this is something that I'm interested in as well. I know they've talked about it. I know that NDOT has put in a couple of temporary improvements at that northwest corner. I think some delineator posts to help the turning movements a little bit, but that is a small fix in a big problem of an intersection. We are limited on what we can do, quite honestly. We rely on NDOT to fund improvements at this intersection. Now, once they do, then there will be talks about what we want, what they want, how we can work together. But this is just one of those intersections that, as a city, we are incredibly limited at what we can proactively do. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad. Let's just say, because I think, this, I mean, it's actually skewing the data in a big way here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that intersection is, I think we would all agree, is terrible. And
Plus, there's a grocery store on the other side of the intersection.
there's a grocery store, there's an elementary school,
This is,
Yeah.
and I don't want to focus on this intersection too much, but this is the dividing point for a lot of folks who not just want to go to this grocery store, but that need to get to Bloomington North High School, about a mile north of here. And Eoban, you were asking at the beginning of this meeting of why not include the north side of this corridor in this project, and quite honestly, without improving this intersection, no matter what we do north of this intersection, there can still be major improvements, but you are still dividing south of the bypass from north of the bypass. And whatever benefit we would like to see from any kind of project is limited because of this dividing line right here.
Okay. Different, but kind of similar question. The bridge, the Madison Street Bridge over the CSX tracks.
Yep.
Does the city own this bridge? Does CSX own it? Let's say there need to be some changes made to the configuration of the street, that's running on the bridge. What kind of constraints or, I guess, leeway do we have there?
That is a good question. I don't have a good answer for you.
Well, the county would own the bridge. The county owns all bridges over 20 feet. Yeah, so.
Okay, so Monroe County would need to be involved in
Right, yeah.
that Madison Street section.
That
there.
is an interesting section, and this goes before my time in Bloomington, and some of you all might know this, but Rogers used to go straight north and connect with each other instead of swerve over and connect with Madison. That was a project, maybe, I don't know,
I think it was the
30
90s
30
or
years
something,
ago or
yeah.
so. So there have been changes there in the past, half century, but you're right, this is another dividing line for folks who live in the Maple Heights neighborhood and north of 14th Street versus coming down to the downtown and Trades District area. That would be a tough project, quite honestly.
So it used to be, at one time, it was a wooden bridge. One-lane wooden bridge before they replaced it.
Yeah.
But probably the only thing you could look at there would be some type of pedestrian bridge, because I would doubt that the county would want to hang a pedestrian sidewalk off the side of their bridge, because it creates some other issues. But there are pedestrian bridges that you can, like at Country Club down there, something like that might work.
Just something to factor in.
Yep.
Well, I just want to say this is a great start, and appreciate the work that's already gone into this initial presentation, and definitely excited to learn more and see how this progresses.
Any other questions from the group?
I had like a general question.
Yeah.
So we talked about our responsibilities in the beginning. So I'm curious when we will be like voting or approving anything. Will there be like short and long term? Like will there be like different opinions, or it will be like a package of things we approve, different initiatives as well, like how granular it's gonna be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for you yet.
That's great.
Again, this is the
We're
first
far from
quarter
it.
study in which we have combined those short-term immediate improvements with the long-term vision. I would imagine most of the study will be one package, one final document of a study. But there are also points that we would like to include in there of temporary improvements at this intersection or along this part of the corridor, something like that. And I imagine those are items that you will have questions and comments about and want to possibly approve one by one. And so I think it all depends on what we end up proposing. Again, as we go through this process, the timeline that we're looking at right now is, Drew did a good job of laying out what steps need to happen. I think right now, for a final study to be reviewed and approved by the Transportation Commission, we would be looking at about midsummer, let's say around July, I think is the goal. Things change, but summer's the goal. And so as we move forward in this process, and especially after we get this public outreach data, then that'll give us a much better direction of where we need to go both short-term and long-term. And then we all might have some more, I would say, clarity on what you all will be reviewing come summer.
Yeah, that
And
works.
along the same lines, are we gonna see it in one big report, or are we gonna see like 1, 2, 3, and 4, like the sections that they had up on the screen?
So it will be eventually in one long report, but the final concepts that you will be seeing will be different sections of the corridor. It will not be the full corridor itself. So we'll be looking at, call it 10 different cross sections along the corridor. I forget what the exact number is, but 10 different cross sections that essentially are the characteristic of that area. So maybe one between Country Club and Rockport, because that is an area. Maybe one for a certain intersection. So it won't be the entire corridor laid out, but it will be representative of the corridor. If that makes
But will
sense.
that be presented to us as in the sections, or are we gonna get everything submitted to us all at once? Like, here's the preliminary report for Country Club to
That's
the
fair.
45, 46 bypass.
Everything will be submitted in one report.
You also mentioned like two versions of designs, like two alternatives.
Yeah.
Like, so does it mean like for each section, or like even for each smaller components of it?
I think it depends on what feedback we get.
Yeah.
I know a lot of my answers are it depends, but right now it very much does depend.
If you had any assumptions, it's alright. I mean, it works even
Right.
like this. Yeah.
I mean, if it turns out that there is one direction that the public wants to go in that aligns with the planners and project managers' visions, then we don't need to do two concepts. But
Mhm.
usually there comes, I think you were talking about it earlier, those dividing points where we might prioritize one goal over another, one objective over another. That's usually what these concepts try to entail.
Mm-hmm. But they will be per segment, right? That was a question. Okay.
What I was just to add to that a little more context, like what we said we would do is in the alternatives phase, we'd look at 3 different locations and come up with these typical sections, like high level plan view concepts and before and after photo renderings. And then once we decide on, this is the approach we want to move forward with, then we would look at plan view concepts at 10 locations. So which is what Hank said, 10 places we would draw something up like this
Mhm.
to say this kind of represents this area generally.
Something scalable as well, I guess, right? You don't really want to design one item per case. Yeah. Great.
Well, thanks, everybody. We're 2 minutes early, so and I like to end my meetings early. So is there anybody have any other input, questions, thoughts, concerns? Anyone want to move to adjourn the meeting?
I move we adjourn.
Any seconds?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I think the ayes have it, unless you need to poll everybody. All right, adjourned. Thank you, everybody.